You already know the jingle. You haven't heard it in years and you still know every word. There's a magical place. We're on our way there with toys in their millions, all under one roof. If you grew up in Britain in the 1980s or 1990s, those words are somewhere in the back of your head right now, and they'll be there for the rest of your life. That's what Toys R Us did. It didn't just sell you things, it gave you a feeling that arrived before Christmas, before the car journey, before you even walked through the door. The jingle came on the telly and something happened in your chest. You knew where you were going. You couldn't wait. Toys R Us arrived in Britain in 1985. American in origin, founded in 1957 in Rockville, Maryland by Charles Lazarus, a man who spotted that returning soldiers from the Second World War were starting families, and those families needed baby furniture, then toys, then everything. The company brought something to Britain that hadn't quite existed here before. Not just a toy shop, a toy warehouse. A place so large that you could spend an entire afternoon inside it and still not see everything. The stores were deliberately enormous. Out-of-town retail parks, car parks stretching in every direction. A building that looked more like a distribution center than a shop. Inside, the ceilings were high, the aisles were wide, and the shelves climbed upward in a way that felt genuinely impressive to a child who was used to the toy section being a corner of Woolworths or a dedicated aisle in BHS. Here, toys were the entire point. Every department, every aisle, every shelf was dedicated to the single purpose of selling you something you'd been wanting since you first saw it advertised on a Saturday morning. The logo was deliberately written backwards, the R facing the wrong way bad, because Charles Lazarus wanted it to look like a child had written it. A child had designed the sign of the shop where children came to choose what they wanted most in the world. That detail mattered more than it sounds. It said, "This place is yours. You belong here. The adults are just the ones who pay." Geoffrey the giraffe was everywhere. On the bags, on the signage, on the television advertisements that started airing in Britain from 1989, tall and friendly and permanently associated with the specific excitement of knowing you were being taken somewhere extraordinary. Children who visited stores where a life-size Geoffrey costume was on the shop floor remember it vividly. The slightly surreal experience of a very large giraffe in a toy shop, which somehow made perfect sense because nothing about Toys R Us was normal-sized. Everything was bigger than it was supposed to be. That was the whole point. Christmas without Toys R Us is what most British children under 40 have grown up with, which means they've missed something that's genuinely difficult to describe without sounding like you're exaggerating. It started with the catalogue. Toys R Us produced a thick, glossy Christmas catalogue every year that arrived in the house, and immediately became the most important document in the building. Children sat with it for hours, working through page by page, circling things with a pen or folding down corners, building a list that was optimistic rather than realistic, because the point wasn't to get everything, it was to imagine getting everything. The catalogue made desire concrete. It gave you the specific names of specific things, this Lego set, this Barbie, this scale extric, so that when Christmas morning arrived and you opened something from the list, you knew exactly what you were getting and why you'd wanted it. The trip to the store itself was an event that required preparation. You got in the car with your parents and drove somewhere that felt further away than it was because the anticipation made everything feel longer. You walked in through automatic doors and the scale of it hit you immediately. The noise, the ceiling, the sheer volume of product stacked in every direction. Action figures in one direction, board games in another, bikes near the back, video games somewhere in the middle with their own particular kind of excitement because video games in the 1990s were still new enough to feel genuinely futuristic. Parents would follow children around with a kind of patient exhaustion, watching them pick things up and put them down, hearing the same things said again and again. Can we get this one? Can we get this one? Navigating the negotiation of what was possible and what wasn't this year. And children would be calculating, always calculating, working out which thing was the most important, which one they'd be most disappointed not to receive, which compromise was acceptable, and which wasn't. It was education in wanting things and understanding that wanting wasn't the same as getting. Toys R Us taught that lesson to a generation of British children, and not unkindly. There's a Magical Place first aired on British television in 1989. It was not a subtle piece of advertising. It was designed to do one thing, make children feel a specific, overwhelming excitement about Toys R Us, and it succeeded so completely that it became one of the most recognised advertising jingles in British television history. The jingle ran through the 1990s and into the 2000s, updated occasionally but always recognisable, always carrying the same promise. Millions of toys all under one roof. The Magical Place. Geoffrey the giraffe smiling from the screen. and children across Britain watching Saturday morning television or ITV before a programme they'd been waiting for would hear the opening notes and something would change in the room. You sat up. You paid attention. You felt it. What the advertising created was an association so deep that it's almost impossible to undo. Toys R Us didn't just advertise a shop, it advertised a feeling. The feeling of anticipation, of Christmas approaching, of wanting something so much it was almost physical. That feeling became attached to the brand so completely that even now, decades after the last British store closed, hearing the jingle causes something in people who grew up with it. Not nostalgia exactly, something more immediate than that. A physical memory of what it felt like to be 7 years old and absolutely certain that if you could just get to that shop, everything would be exactly right. In 2000, Toys R Us made a decision that would define everything that followed. The internet was new and nobody was entirely sure what to do with it, and Toys R Us decided that rather than build its own online store, it would partner with Amazon. The company agreed to pay Amazon $50 million a year, plus a percentage of sales, to become Amazon's exclusive toy retailer. ToysRUs.com would redirect to Amazon. Toys R Us would handle the toys. Amazon would handle the technology. It seemed reasonable at the time. Amazon was good at the internet. Toys R Us was good at toys. The partnership would combine both strengths. What Toys R Us didn't anticipate was that Amazon would also allow other toy sellers onto the same platforms, competitors selling the same products at prices Toys R Us couldn't match. The exclusivity that Toys R Us had paid tens of millions of dollars for didn't exist in the way they'd understood it. Toys R Us sued Amazon in 2006 and won. The contract was dissolved, but the damage was done in a way that no court ruling could undo. While the legal case had been running, Amazon had spent 6 years building the most sophisticated online retail operation in the world. Toys R Us had spent those 6 years doing nothing of the sort. By 2006, Amazon was the dominant force in online toy sales. Toys R Us was starting from nothing, trying to build an online presence in a market that someone else now owned, competing with a company that had been doing it properly since the beginning. The stores kept operating. The jingle kept playing. But every year that passed without a serious digital strategy was a year closer to the end. The internet hadn't killed Toys R Us. Toys R Us had handed the internet to a competitor and then been surprised when the competitor used it. In 2005, a consortium of private equity firms, Bain Capital, KKR, and Vornado Realty Trust, bought Toys R Us for $7.5 billion. Most of that money was borrowed. The company that had been a publicly traded retailer became a privately held business loaded with debt it had never chosen and couldn't escape. The annual interest payments alone ran to $400 or $500 million. Every year, before a single toy was bought or sold, before a single member of staff was paid, before a single store's rent was covered, $500 million left the business to service the debt that the buyout had created. There was nothing left to invest. No money for new store formats. No money for a proper digital strategy. No money to modernize the warehouses that the UK managing director would later describe as too big and expensive to run. The stores stayed exactly as they were while the world changed around them. In the UK, the business made a loss in 7 of the 8 years before it collapsed. 7 years of losing money in a country where the brand was still genuinely loved, where the jingle still worked, where parents still brought children through the doors at Christmas because they'd been brought through the same doors themselves. The love was real. The business underneath the love was in serious trouble, and the debt that had been loaded onto the American parent made it impossible to fix. In September 2017, the American parent filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the United States. For the UK, it was the beginning of a very specific kind of ending. Not sudden, but slow and public and uncomfortable to watch. The UK arm entered administration on 28 February 2018. Moorfields Advisory were appointed to manage the process. Administrators Simon Thomas and Aaron Kendall made clear that a buyer was being sought, that all stores would remain open for now, that this was an orderly wind-down. Customers were told to redeem gift cards and vouchers as soon as possible. That instruction, the quiet, careful wording of it, told you more about what was happening than any official statement could. On 2nd March, liquidation sales began. The yellow sale signs went up in the windows of 105 stores across Britain. On 14th March, it was confirmed that all stores would close within 6 weeks. At the Maidenhead head office, 67 people lost their jobs immediately. Across the country, more than 3,000 members of staff were told their roles were gone. The pension deficit, which had been in the background of every restructuring conversation for years, landed with the Pension Protection Fund, somewhere between £30 and £93 million, depending on how you calculated it, that would now have to be covered by a safety net that existed precisely for moments like this. The last British Toys R Us stores closed on 24th April 2018. 32 years after the first one opened, the doors locked for the final time. Children who had been brought to those stores by their parents were now parents themselves, and their children had never known what it felt like to walk through those doors and have the scale of it stop you in your tracks. The name came back. Of course it did. Names always come back. In 2022, the Toys R Us online store reopened for UK customers. From 2022 onwards, concessions appeared inside W.H. Smith stores, small branded corners selling a curated selection. Geoffrey the giraffe is still there on the bags and the signage, smiling with his stars instead of spots that he's had since 2007. The brand is technically alive. It is not the same thing. A concession inside W.H. Smith is not a warehouse you drove to on a Saturday morning with your whole day ahead of you. It is not aisles that went further than you could see. It is not the ceiling that seemed higher than a building had any right to be. It is not a place that a child could get lost in and not mind being lost. What Toys R Us was, what it really was, underneath the debt and the private equity and the Amazon lawsuit and the liquidation sales, was a promise made to children. The promise that there existed a place where everything you wanted was available, where the scale of what was possible felt genuinely unlimited, where Christmas wasn't just coming, but could be rehearsed and planned and imagined in advance across 50,000 square feet of toys laid out just for you. That promise was kept faithfully and consistently for 32 years in Britain. The jingle played on Saturday morning television and children heard it and knew. We all knew. There was a magical place. We went there. And for the hours we were inside it, it was exactly as magical as advertised. We didn't know we were saying goodbye to it. We thought it would always be there. We thought magical places lasted.